Currently, internet searches about the Euphrates River have been growing significantly, and do you know why? It's all because of the importance it holds in biblical prophecies, especially those concerning the end of the world. The Euphrates is a name that appears over 50 times in the Bible, and it all starts back in the book of Genesis, where it is described as one of the rivers flowing from the Garden of Eden. Remember that place, right? So, in the book of Revelation, there's a prophecy that says the Euphrates River will dry up as part of the events leading to the Battle of Armageddon. And look, this drying up isn't considered just a natural accident. No, many see it as a divine act, as if it's clearing the way for armies from the east to advance to the west, all preparing the ground for this battle that has been foretold for centuries. And then comes Armageddon, right? It's like the great final showdown between good and evil, and people expect all of this to result in the establishment of peace and divine rule on earth. All of this is written in the Bible. It's one of those things that deeply affects many people. And in this video, I'll explain it all to you. Have you ever heard about the Euphrates River? It's more than just an ordinary river, you know? Let me tell you something interesting about it and its connection to something called the Battle of Armageddon. Stay tuned, because this story is full of excitement. And while you're at it, make sure to check if you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any videos. Here, I tell all the stories from the Bible. They are enriching and fascinating. So, the Euphrates River is an ancient river that flows through places like Syria and Iraq. In the Bible, it's mentioned over 50 times, which is quite a lot, right? At the beginning of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, it's described as one of the rivers that flowed from the Garden of Eden, that amazing place where, they say, humanity had an encounter with God. Cool, huh? Now, here's the catch. Lately, people have been super interested in this river. Do you know why? Because its water is decreasing, revealing ancient ruins at its bottom. Some people think this is connected to things that were foretold in the Bible about the end times. Could it be? Well, before we dive into that topic, it's important to understand what the Euphrates River represents and why it's drying up. Believe it or not, this river plays a huge role in both spiritual and geographical history. It's part of a region called the Fertile Crescent, which is a very fertile strip of land that stretches from Egypt to Iraq. So, it's like the Euphrates is in the middle of everything. It's kind of a landmark. That's why so many people are paying attention to all of this. So, shall we learn more about this together? The whole story of the Euphrates River has piqued the curiosity of many people. As its water decreases, ancient ruins start appearing at the bottom. It's like discovering a hidden treasure, but full of mysteries. What's even more interesting is that this is related to some stories from the Bible about the end of the world. Did you know? Many people think this could be the beginning of something significant, like a prophecy coming true. So, imagine, way back when the Bible was written, people already talked a lot about the Euphrates. It was kind of an important reference point back then. It was right in the middle of the Fertile Crescent, which was a super important area for agriculture and everything else. That's why when the water level of the Euphrates starts to drop and these ruins appear, many people take notice. And then all these theories arise about what this could mean for the future. It's a pretty wild story, isn't it? Everything starting with an ancient river and ending with theories about the end of the world. We never know what might happen, but it's always good to keep an eye on the clues that history gives us, right? Through the Bible, we learn about so many stories, and I really enjoy it. How about you? And hey, make sure to check if you've already subscribed to the channel. If not, subscribe now. The knowledge from the Bible is liberating and very good for all of us. You know those rivers called the Tigris and the Euphrates? They're super important in some stories we hear in the Bible. This area where these rivers are located is called Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers. So, there's a very ancient story about a place called the Garden of Eden, which according to the Bible, was somewhere in the Middle East, between these rivers. But look, over time, things change, right? Sometimes, even a flood can make a river change its course. So, there's an ancient flood that happened in Noah's time, and it changed a lot on the earth. So, the Euphrates River that was mentioned at the beginning of the Bible might have changed its course over time. It's like if we called a place Bethlehem today in reference to another place that existed in the past. And look, in the Bible, there are a bunch of stories about the Euphrates. God even promised a land that extended from the Euphrates River to the Mediterranean Sea for the Israelites in Deuteronomy. And there's a prophet named Isaiah who talks about the Euphrates as a sign of an empire that threatened the people of Israel. And you know what's even crazier? There are parts in the Bible that say the Euphrates will dry up one day. Can you believe it? It's like the story of the river has a predictable ending. All these stories make us think a lot about how things change over time, right? There's only one thing that doesn't change and will never change. The Word of God. Have you heard about the Apocalypse? It's a book full of mysteries and predictions. Look, there's a part that talks about the Euphrates River drying up. So, the Apocalypse is like a book that has everything. Some people get scared just hearing about it, but there are also those who love to delve into its prophecies. And hey, there's even a special promise from God for those who read and practice what's written there. But hey, there's something important. Messing with the text of the Apocalypse is way too risky. If anyone tries to change anything, like adding or removing parts, they'll end up in trouble. If you add something, you'll attract all those terrifying plagues that are in the book. And if you take something away, you'll lose the good part of the story and the chance to live in the New Jerusalem, which is like paradise. God made it clear that this information is valuable and even gave a scheme of rewards and punishments for those who deal with it. It's like a warning that the story is to be taken seriously. And you know what's even crazier? In the Apocalypse, it's predicted that one day the Euphrates River will dry up. Just imagine, that must be a sign of something really important that's going to happen. It's amazing how these stories make us think, right? You know that kind of scary book called Revelation? Well, there's a part in there that talks about the Euphrates River, did you know? It's in chapter 16. The Apocalypse is divided into 3 parts. One talks about what's happening now, another talks about what might happen soon, and the last one is like a peek far into the future. The Euphrates is super important in that part that talks about the future just around the corner. In the Apocalypse, there are a bunch of scary things happening, like judgments and stuff. It starts with some seals, then some trumpets, and ends with some bowls. But hey, even with all that, the promise is that things won't get worse than what's written there. And look how interesting, the Apocalypse uses a lot of symbols, like these seals. It's like a way of explaining things in a different, somewhat hidden way, you know? So, the Euphrates is right in the middle of all this confusion, which makes us think that it has a very important role in this whole story. All these things may seem a bit confusing, but it's fascinating to think about what they might mean, isn't it? The Apocalypse is that book in the Bible full of symbols and intense things. You know, there they talk about some seals, trumpets, and bowls that represent very important things that are going to happen. Look, these events they mention are so serious that, if they weren't stopped, they would end all life on Earth. Just imagine, everything would be turned upside down. But hey, God gives a little help and shortens the time, otherwise things would get really ugly. And you know what's even crazier? God's bowls of wrath are like the worst judgments the world has ever seen. They talk about it in the Apocalypse. It's like if iniquity, which is a difficult word for evil, reached its maximum and God responded with all his wrath against sin. And the Euphrates River? It has a special role in this story. Around the time of the bowls, there's one that talks about the Euphrates. It's like a very important detail in all this confusion. Oh, and you know what else? There's a part that talks about very painful wounds for those who follow the wrong path. It's like a very strong warning for people to be careful and do the right things. This whole story is very exciting and full of twists and turns. So, after these bowls of God's wrath, which are like super strong punishments, things get really tense. People who are on the wrong side, following the beast and worshipping its image, end up suffering a lot from very bad wounds. It's like a very serious warning that choosing the wrong path can bring painful consequences, you know? And the Euphrates River, which had appeared before, returns to have an important role in the story. It's like it's a sign that things are reaching a critical point, you know? It's very intriguing to think about how all these details fit into this story full of mysteries in the Apocalypse. Finally, it's quite an adventure exploring these passages of the Bible. There's always something new to learn and reflect on. These stories make us think about our choices and what really matters in life, don't they? Well, now things get serious. Let's talk about these bowls of God's wrath, which are like super strong punishments. The first bowl brings painful sores to those who have the mark of the beast and worship its image. In the second bowl, what happens is that the sea turns into blood, like in a zombie movie. And then, everything that lives in the sea, like fish and dolphins, dies because of it. Just imagine. Then, in the third bowl, even the rivers and springs of fresh water turn into blood too. It's like the water actually turns into real blood. You can imagine it's a pretty scary scene. And look what happens in the fourth bowl. An angel pours the bowl on the sun, and then it starts scorching everyone with unbearable heat. It's like a summer day, but 1,000 times worse. And in the fifth bowl, the kingdom of the beast, which is like the territory of the Antichrist, becomes all dark. It's like a starless night, really scary. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, right? It's impressive how these stories from the apocalypse affect us. It's always good to remember that it's important to make the right choices in life, so as not to end up on the wrong side of this whole story. We've reached the sixth bowl, which is almost the end of the judgments that happen in the apocalypse. And look what happens. The Euphrates River, which is super important, dries up. It's like the water disappears suddenly, leaving the river all dry. The seventh bowl is poured out as part of the final judgments described in the book of Revelation. When the seventh bowl is poured out, catastrophic events occur that culminate in the end of the world as we know it. According to Revelation, after the pouring out of the seventh bowl, a loud voice comes from heaven, saying, "It is done." This symbolizes the complete fulfillment of God's wrath and the end of the judgments described in the bowls. The seventh bowl triggers a series of final events, including storms, earthquakes, and other large-scale natural disasters. It also marks the beginning of the final battle between good and evil, the Armageddon. However, it's important to note that while the seventh bowl brings judgment and destruction, it also represents the beginning of a new era, where evil is defeated and divine justice is established. It's a crucial moment in the narrative of the apocalypse, marking the end of times and the beginning of a new heaven and a new earth, as described in the Bible. Then, the text says that the kings of the east, who are like the big bosses in that region, can march with their armies towards the west. It's like an open road for them to move forward without obstacles. You know, in ancient times, the Romans thought that the Euphrates was like a protective barrier against attacks from empires further east. But then, with the river dried up, this barrier disappears, and it becomes easier for people to travel. It's quite a twist, isn't it? Just imagine the impact that would have had back then. It's amazing how these ancient stories still surprise us today. So, the Euphrates was a huge river, you know? It stretched over a lot of places, like 1,800 miles, which is almost double the distance between us and the moon. And it had a pretty varied width, ranging from 300 to 1,200 meters, like a really big football field. So, when the Euphrates dries up, it becomes a superhighway. It's like the water goes away and leaves the path clear for a huge crowd of armies from the east, like those from China, India, and Japan, to march towards the west. Just imagine the size of that parade. And you know what? There are a lot of ideas about why this event happens, but what matters is that when the Euphrates disappears, it's a significant sign. It's like the beginning of a major event foretold in the Bible's prophecies about the end times. Some people even think that the drying up of the Euphrates has to do with the so-called Antichrist, who is like a global villain associated with Europe. And then, there's an epic showdown between him and God. Then, the kings of the earth gather in a place called Armageddon to face off. And you know what? The Bible says that this drying up of the Euphrates is a divine thing, like an angel pouring out a bowl of God's wrath. It's a spine-chilling scene, right? These stories are full of emotion and mystery. So, when the Euphrates dries up, it's not because of changes in the climate or things we do, like messing too much with the environment. Actually, it's something planned from above, from God. It's like He's clearing the way for the kings of the East to move forward, preparing everything for the great confrontation that's going to happen. And where is this confrontation going to take place? Over there in a place called Megiddo. It's like the main stage for this epic battle. It's kind of like the Super Bowl of battles, but way more intense. The word Armageddon is used to talk about this great battle, but it's also used in a more general way to describe any situation where there's a huge and serious fight, one that can bring a lot of destruction. But you know what? In the apocalypse, Armageddon is like the final showdown, the decisive moment where God will face the forces of evil once and for all. It's like the climax of the whole story, the most important moment of all. And the name Armageddon comes from a Hebrew word meaning Mount of Megiddo, which is where this battle is prophesied to take place. Check out this intense part of the apocalypse. So, in chapter 16 of the apocalypse, there's a powerful word, Armageddon. And it marks the beginning of a great battle. You know the dragon, who is Satan, and his evil buddies, like the Antichrist and the false prophet? They release some evil spirits that perform magic and convince the kings of the whole world to go to this giant war that's about to happen. But in the midst of all this chaos, who shows up? Jesus. He returns to earth with a heavenly army ready to set things straight. He will tread upon the Mount of Olives and defeat the forces of evil once and for all. The Antichrist and the false prophet go straight to the lake of fire, and the rest of the rebels are defeated by a sword that comes out of Jesus' mouth. It's like a scene from a movie, but real. And look, after this battle, the birds will gather to feast on the remains of the enemies. It's a pretty scary scene, but it shows how powerful God is and how he ultimately defeats evil. So now we're trying to figure out where this important place called Armageddon is, but it's not easy. There's no mountain with that name, so it's kind of confusing. But hey, the word Ahar can also mean hill, so the area near the hill that's around Megiddo, about 60 miles north of Jerusalem, seems to be the right place. It's like the stage for this great battle. And you know what's interesting? Megiddo has seen it all throughout history. It had wars with Egyptians, Assyrians, Greeks, Romans, Crusaders, and even with Napoleon's troops. Imagine the chaos that went on there. And that's not all, Megiddo also saw two of the greatest tragedies. It's a place full of history and emotion which still intrigues scholars and curious people today. It's like an open book full of secrets. This whole story makes us think about how the world can be full of mysteries and surprises, right? And Armageddon is just another chapter in this great adventure that is the history of humanity. We have two super important moments in the Bible, the death of Saul and his sons, and the death of King Josiah. These events show how sometimes things can get really complicated in the history of God's people. So, there's a really bad influence from some evil spirits, and that makes the kings of the whole world gather their armies for a mega war. The Antichrist, who is like the main villain, is leading this big attack. But look, in the midst of all this chaos, who shows up? Jesus Christ. He returns to earth with a bunch of angels, ready to fix this whole mess. He steps on the Mount of Olives and defeats the forces of evil once and for all. And you know what else happens? The Antichrist and the false prophet, who are the villains, go straight to the lake of fire. It's like the end of the line for them, and they will pay for all the bad things they've done. These stories are full of emotion and teachings, showing how powerful God is and how good always triumphs over evil in the end. So, what happens is that the Antichrist and the false prophet, who are the villains of the story, go straight to the lake of fire. It's like the end of the line for them, and they will pay for all the bad things they've done. After that, Jesus will take the stage. He will deal with Satan and establish his kingdom here on earth for 1,000 years. It's like a victory party, you know? And everything will be set right again, just as it was meant to be from the beginning. The Battle of Armageddon is like a great showdown between good and evil, with lots of different characters entering the story, even supernatural beings. And look, the drying up of the Euphrates and this battle are connected in time. The first event is like a preparation for the second, it's like the opening act of the show. It's a story full of action, mystery, and teachings, showing how good always triumphs in the end. It's like an exciting roller coaster ride, with twists and turns that we never know what to expect. You know, all this journey we've been on shows us that the final showdown between good and evil will bring a new era of peace, where God will reign over everything. It's like the happy ending of a great movie. And with that, we conclude our journey through this incredible study about the Euphrates River and its special connection with the Battle of Armageddon. It's a super important event that the Bible talks about, and now we've understood a little more about it. I hope this video has helped you better understand the stories of the Bible and what they want to teach us. And hey, before we say goodbye, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this content with your friends. That way, more people can learn about these incredible stories. Take the opportunity to leave your suggestion for a video, topic, or curiosity that you would like to see here on the channel. It's very important to exchange ideas with you. Until the next video.